All right, we're going to get started so we can be on time and finish early enough to give you some time to rest before dinner. So I hope you all got your protein for lunch, like we learned this morning. We are going to start this afternoon with a very fascinating speaker you will all enjoy. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Veronica Miller from the Forum for Collaborative Research and the University of California, Berkeley School of Public Health. Veronica is the executive director of the Forum for Collaborative Research, which is a public-private partnership addressing cutting-edge science and policy issues through a process of stakeholder engagement and deliberation. Dr. Miller has extensive experience in working with all major global and U.S. organizations and agencies involved in HIV research and policy. An expert in regulatory science and drug development, she's accomplished in the process of engaging stakeholders from both sides of the Atlantic to resolve significant health policy and public health issues in the areas of HIV, Hep C, Hep B, Hep C, human cytomegalovirus in solid organ and stem cell transplant patients, and liver diseases, NASH and fibrosis. She's a senior researcher and lecturer at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. She developed and teaches a course on FDA and drug development based on case studies from the Forum's rich history in facilitating drug development to Berkeley and Bay Area graduate students and postdocs. Dr. Miller has served on numerous government and industry advisory boards. She's published over 90 peer-reviewed publications on treatment and regulatory strategies. Dr. Miller obtained a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of Manitoba and a Doctor of Philosophy in Immunology from the University of Manitoba. It's incredibly exciting for our community that the PSC Forum, which she has started, has been launched, and that Veronica is sharing her expertise in moving disease treatment forward with our community. I think there's a lot of promise in this new group that she has formed, so she will be speaking about the model. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ricky, and also to the whole board of the PSC partners. And I've gotten to know many of the participants of this incredible conference, and it's a real honor for me to be here and be able to talk to you about our newest project, which is the PSC Forum. And Ricky, thank you so much for that introduction, because now there's many things I don't have to specifically mention, but we've been working in these 5 disease areas, but our newest launch is the PSC Forum, which was literally just launched very recently. And we separate that from the Liver Forum, because the Liver Forum, you'd think that PSC would fit in under that, and it's certainly a liver disease, but we really figured it really needed its own safe space to really focus on PSC and not let NASH and fibrosis and other things sort of take over. So that's why we have a separate steering committee and a separate project just for PSC. And I've had to learn a lot, so it's been really great to just be here, and I've been learning throughout my stay here at this conference. So basically what we do is we bring together the stakeholders, and I've listed the main ones here. There are others like research, foundations, etc. But in terms of government, in this case, we're talking particularly about regulatory agencies. We're talking about the pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies that are the developers and manufacturers. We're talking about patients, and patients includes both patients and advocates and anyone really from the community that's affected by this disease, and of course academia. And in the place where they all intersect, that particular place is what we call the forum. So it's really bringing all of everyone's interest to a common table, a common platform where we can discuss issues that are of importance to everyone. But everyone, of course, retains their own identity, and they keep doing all the things they do. And for example, with industry members, they will keep competing with each other outside of the forum, but when they are at the forum table, they bring their scientific expertise and they collaborate. And that is the basic premise of the forum, and that is by definition who we are, and people don't participate unless they agree to that. And our operating principle is actually very simple. We say that once we have some new therapeutic strategies identified, unless we're developing them efficiently, safely, we're not doing the best for all the stakeholders, including the patients. And we really want a win-win for everyone. Our key characteristics include information democracy, that we provide a non-competitive, safe environment. We're independent. Everyone that participates owns the process together. And we look for synergy rather than duplication, and that's how we increase the efficiency. And we allow everyone to do what they do best, because everyone comes in with a very specific perspective and expertise that they bring to the table that the other stakeholders don't have. And that way everyone can learn from each other. But, we allow everyone to do what they do best, and we don't say to anyone, well, you can't, many organizations, for example, don't bring in industry because of all the conflicts that perceived or real that might occur, but we're saying they know how to develop drugs, and unless we bring them to the table, we're not going to get there. And so that's simply our model, and I'm not saying other models aren't right, but this is how we operate, and those are our principles. And when we talk about the regulatory process, it's all about benefit risk. And I think many people think that regulators have sort of standard formulas by which they make decisions, but it's not. There's a lot of thought and there's a lot of room for negotiation and really thinking about questions. So when we say it's about the right benefit risk value or balance, right, then who actually says what that is? And there's not one magic formula. And who decides what is sufficient benefit and what is too much risk? So, and there are many examples where patient and family groups actually went to the FDA and said, you pulled this drug from the market, but for our community, this drug was very important. There's one for multiple sclerosis where that actually happened, and that drug is back on the market because the families and the patients said, we need that drug. So the influence that patients have and patients' families have cannot be overestimated. So normally what happens is that each sponsor, each company, and regulatory speak, we call them sponsors because they sponsor the development program. And it's a very secretive process and it's confidential, but there's all the reason why it should be. So every company talks to every agencies, where it's FDA or in Europe or in Japan or Brazil, wherever, but nobody else learns from that process because it's very confidential. Whereas our model, we bring everyone to the same table. Everyone hears the same information. And we work very closely with both the FDA and the European Medicines Agency. So immediately we have this cross-Atlantic informal harmonization of how people think about how these drugs should be developed. And really what that does then is it increases the clarity. And if you talk to any investors or pharmaceutical companies, they will tell you, unless we see a regulatory path, we are not really interested in doing anything because we don't know, we don't see the map ahead of us. So anything we, and that means all of us, can do to increase the clarity will encourage more people to come into the field. And of course, the reverse of that is that we decrease uncertainty, redundancy, development time, and risk. So this process really increases the efficiency because all of this, and that then allows more people to come into the game because they see, okay, there's a path forward. We don't have to go there with a machete and go through the jungle and be the ones that, beat down all the bushes so we can get to the goal. And thus, it is a win-win for everyone because we're not lowering the standards, we're just increasing the efficiency. And I feel very, very strongly about this, and I put this in all my talks, and I really believe and am convinced that it is the only ethical and responsible way to proceed. And if anyone does not want to collaborate, we should really ask them, why are you wasting people's time, and why are you wasting patients' time to participate in studies if you're not willing to collaborate and make it as efficient as possible? So in terms of the members, this is the same for all of our different forums. We have regulators from the FDA. In this case, it's the Division of Gastroenterology and the Office of New Drugs, and also CDRH. Those are people involved in diagnostics. We have the European Medicines Association. We work with professional societies, a number of different companies, including both diagnostic and industry, and of course academic, US and Europe, and the patient voice, and everyone has an equal voice, and in our organization, the patient voice carries as much weight as everyone else's. And I'm very proud. Oh, yeah, so this is just kind of more blah, blah about the forum. But what I really wanted to say here, we're very pleased that Ricky Seyfert is on the steering committee representing the community in the US, and we have Martine Walmsley representing the community in Europe. And so your voice reaches us through Ricky. And she's on the steering committee, but of course the larger forum is bigger, so there will be many roles to be filled in the different working groups, etc. So our strategy is it's a collaborative dialogue and deliberation on urgent gaps, and as people come together, they build trust. We ask some key questions that maybe by collaboration we could answer. And we allow the consensus to evolve. We never force it. It's always science-based. And then as this process occurs, it might seem like not that important a question, but the minute we start having consensus evolve across the Atlantic, that builds more trust, and then we can tackle more challenging issues. And what kind of impact is it that we're looking for? We're looking for new perspectives on disease and the regulatory process. In my experience, and I know there's many different people, there's thousands and thousands of people at the FDA, but in my experience, the people we have worked with, they're as anxious as everyone else to make things go forward. And they're often just as frustrated, but they don't have a mechanism to engage with people. They can't just, engage with patients. There's nothing that prevents them from talking to people, but there's just not a mechanism. So this is a mechanism for them to hear what the concerns are, what patients are willing to accept in terms of risk. Because we shouldn't be saying, the regulator shouldn't be saying, and the academician shouldn't be saying, this is too much risk for you. Well, maybe you don't think so. Maybe you think I'd rather undergo that risk. And I am a responsible adult and I can make that decision. You don't have to make that decision for me. But I have found regulators are very responsive to urgent public health needs, and they just sometimes need to be in the right environment where they can explore different things. And sometimes we have real paradigm shifts in regulatory thinking, and sometimes that starts with incremental steps, and there's a little arrow there that didn't show up. But sometimes it starts with little steps, incremental steps that then yield a paradigm shift. And one example is with our HCV Forum, which at the time that this was really, really active, it was when the standard of care was an injectable pegylated interferon and ribavirin that had horrible side effects. You basically had the flu every time, some people severe flu every time you had to have one of these injections. Then sponsors started to develop all oral regimens, so you could just take a pill with direct acting antivirals. So how on earth could you compare a study that has an all-oral regimen that you only have to take for 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 24 weeks with little side effects to a comparator that you need a full year of injectable toxic substances? And so we went round and round and round, and suddenly the breakthrough came, and that was, we don't need to compare it to that. We know what the rate of sustained virus response is in these old regimens. So we know that. We don't need to keep comparing to that because we have that information. So if in that setting, maybe 40% of the patients responded, and if in all-oral regimen you suddenly have 90% of the patients responding, you have an effective drug. So why? It was just this ha-ha moment, and it was a real paradigm shift. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Liver Forum because the Liver Forum focuses on NASH, but there are many of the same players in terms of the FDA division as well as the pharmaceutical companies. And it's a very different disease, but we also lack a lot of natural history knowledge that we need to have. So what we really want to get at is to be able to do cross comparisons across clinical trials. And the sort of the pot of gold at the end we want to get to is to have companies donate their placebo arm data into one common database that we can then use to ask many, many different questions. So we have already published, it's just been accepted for publication, a standardization of case definitions and also how data is collected in clinical trials so that all the studies that will be done will be standardized so that it will be much easier to compare what they're doing. And that might sound like a small step, so it's incremental, but it will evolve into a paradigm shift if we continue on this process and are actually able to build a placebo arm cohort and most importantly, find the biomarkers so that we do away with the liver biopsy. So these are just some examples. And so in PSC, I think we have many, many opportunities. And definitely the first thing we can do is to increase the impact of each stakeholder group's efforts. And I often refer to the forum as a sandbox. And we can increase the size of and the number of players in the sandbox. One of the things the steering committee proposed is that we actually, again, start with standardization of case definitions, and we would work with people that are already doing that. We can talk about responsible data sharing. And what I really wanted to emphasize here, what can you all do? And I think many of these things were mentioned yesterday already, but awareness and promotion of clinical research, and, build up a clinical research knowledge base. What does it mean? What does a regulatory process look like? What questions does the FDA need to have answered, et cetera? The patient registry, and a big shout out to Rachel, is phenomenal. You don't know what a treasure you already have. In that, and I strongly support her plea yesterday for get all 30,000 or 32,000 patients in there, because that's of extreme value to everyone in the field. So you already have a tool that you're working with. And also, I think really your perspective, the patient's and the caregiver perspective on what level of benefit is sufficient and what level of risk is too much. You are the ones that need to inform the developers and the regulators about that. And you have a very, very strong voice within this organization and with Ricky on the steering committee. Thank you.